let's go ahead and we're going to get started going through how to set reference, how to set up a test on the CertiFiber Pro. So let me come in, and what I'm going to do is I am going to share my screen right there. So there is my Versive. That is the Versive that is sitting right here on the bench. I've got my mainframe. I've got my remote. We're all ready to go. All right. So welcome. My name's Mike Pennacchi, owner of Network Protocol Specialists LLC here in Seattle, Washington. For the last 10 years, we've been doing the Certified Cable Test Technician program for Fluke Network. So we deliver those classes. We deliver the class online every month. And we alternate between West Coast and East Coast start times. We just did the West Coast this week. And so in those classes, we go through the DSX cable analyzer for copper testing. We go through the CertiFiber Pro, and we go through the OptiFiber Pro. So in our quick start today, we're going to be taking a look at how we use the CertiFiber Pro to go in and test a link and how we get that all set up. So with that, let's jump right in. And the first thing I always like to do when I'm setting up my CertiFiber Pro or any of these tools on the Versive is to go in and create a project. So if I come into my Versive right here and I tap on project, and if you want to follow along, if you have a Versive in your office, at your place of work, and you want to follow along with it, hey, you can follow along and do exactly the same thing. I like to create a new project. Now, the Versive will support up to 100 projects at a time. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to say change project. I go to new project. I'm going to type in the project name, and we're going to call this one quick start. And if we're using the Versive online here, we're going to want to use the keyboard on the screen, not the keyboard on your computer. So I'm going to type in quick start right there. I'm going to hit done. And then I'm going to put in operator. And I can have up to 20 operators stored in the Versive. This is a good idea to keep track of who is going out and running the tests. And if you're CCTT certified, hey, put your CCTT certification number in this field as well as your name. We can have 60 characters in there. And I'm going to select me. Then I'm going to come in here and I'm going to jump right into my test setup. So we're going to go in here and we're going to select our test setup. We are using the CertiFiber Pro Quad module. Now the CertiFiber Pro Quad module, if we flip this over and we zoom in just a bit here, we take a look at this module. What this module is this module has two different output ports on it. We can zoom in even a little bit more there. So what we see is right here, we've got our multi-mode output, we've got our single mode output, and we've got our power meter right here. And the reason we call it the quad module is because for multi-mode, it sends light at 850 and 1300 nanometers. And for the single mode, it does 1310 and 1550. And over here, we have our visual fault locator, which is going to help us locate cracks, bends, things like that in the fiber. So we're going to go through, and that's the module that we're going to be using to do our testing in this quick start. So we'll put that back. Test type. For our test type, we're going to do a smart remote test. Now, a smart remote test is where we test two fibers at the same time. So I will send light from the main to the remote. I'll send light from the remote to the main, and I'm going to test both of those fibers. Now it's important to note that when we're using a test limit that requires length, we must have two fibers. So if you're going to test fibers and you want to be able to measure the length, and that's part of your limit, then you need to make sure that you have two fibers. Bidirectional. Now with bidirectional, if this is turned on, what's going to happen is in the middle of our test, it is going to tell us to swap the fibers. So this will test both fibers in both directions. Now it's important when you're going in and setting up your test that you understand exactly what the test specification or contract calls for. So in this case, if the contract says bidirectional testing shall be conducted, then you need to make sure you turn this on. In fact, I'll even turn this on today. We'll go ahead and do a bidirectional test of our fiber. Our next setting is our fiber type. And I'll tell you what, this setting is critical. When we go in and select our fiber type, this is going to tell it not only what the diameter of the core is, 62.5, 59, depending on whether we're doing single mode, multi-mode, OM1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but also it's going to set the modal bandwidth of the fiber. And this is going to dictate which applications will run across this fiber. So you want to make sure that you have selected the right fiber. This cannot be changed after you run the test. If you choose the wrong fiber type, you run all your tests, and then you come back and you say, oh man, I chose OM2 instead of OM3. All my tests are no good. You're going to have to go back and rerun those tests. So here, I can select my fiber type, and I get some popular fiber types in here, but I can go to more. And I can come in, it says last used, custom, generic. I go to manufacturers. Now what will happen is manufacturers provide Fluke networks with information about each one of the fibers that they want to include in here. When Fluke Networks rolls out a new firmware version, it's included. So if I were to come down in this list and I were to go to say CommScope, this is going to list the different CommScope fibers that are contained in the analyzer. And this is going to contain the specific information for that fiber. I'm going to go back. And I'm going to come in here, and we're going to go back one more. I'm going to choose generic, and I'm going to do OM4 50 micron. That's the fiber we're testing today. Now, we need to select a test limit. And it's really important to keep in mind that when we're doing this testing, when we're doing certification, whether it's copper or fiber, what we're doing is we're going in and taking a very accurate measurement and we're comparing it with a standard. If our measurement isn't accurate, then we don't have a good test. If we have an accurate measurement but we compare it to the wrong standard, our results are garbage. So we want to make sure that when we go in, we choose the right test setup, we choose the right standard. This is going to give us the best test results. So in this case, there's a variety of different test limits that we have in here. Now, I could choose a TIA limit, and this is what's known as a length-based limit. So with this limit, I'm going to need to tell the tester how many connections and how many splices I have. We also have our application-based limits. Now, to fully understand what each one of these limits is looking for, we would need to go in and take a look at the limit lines. So you can go out to flukenetworks.com, you can go to support and downloads, and you can find the limit lines. And this is right now it's a 282 page document where we can find these limits. I'll tell you, things like 10G base SR. If we're testing OM4 fiber and we're testing it to the 10G base SR limit, what we're looking for is loss equal to or less than 2.9 dB and a length of 400 meters or less. In the case of the TIA test, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking for loss per connector, loss per splice, loss per kilometer of fiber. So if I came in and I said more, I said TIA, and I am using reference grade connectors on my patch cords, on my test reference cords. So I'm going to choose TIA 568.3-D-1 multi-mode reference grade connectors. The next thing I'm going to choose is my reference method. We're going to do one jumper. One jumper is the preferred method for cable vendors where they're if you're doing a warranty cable install. The other methods that we see out here We have 2 jumper and we have 3 jumper. Now, I want you to look at this picture when we do this. When I select 2 jumper, what we see is this circle right here represents the portion of the system that we're measuring. Notice that we're missing one of the connectors right there. And that's because with 2 jumper, we reference out one of those connectors. With 1 jumper, we don't. We're measuring both connectors on both ends, and we're measuring the fiber in the middle. 1 jumper is our preferred method. And I'll tell you what, when I look at a report that somebody sends me, the first thing I look at when it comes to fiber is to see if they used 1 jumper or not. So I'm going to show you the 1 jumper method today. Next, we can select our connector type. Now, our connector type is mostly for documentation purposes. However, because I'm doing bidirectional testing today, it will auto-continue the test if I select LC or SC as the connector type. Now, the last thing I need to do is I need to tell it the number of connections and number of splices, because for each connection, I will add a certain amount of loss. Now, if we want to know exactly what this loss is, we would need to go look at the limit lines. In this case, it's going to be 0.75 dB of loss for each mated pair that's embedded in here, and 0.5 dB for each connector on the end, because I'm using reference grade connections. So in this case, what I would do is I would say, we are going to add 0.5 dB of loss for this connector, 0.5 dB of loss for this connector, 1 dB. We have no splices, so no loss for splices. And then the CertiFiber Pro is going to measure the length of this fiber, and it's going to add 3 dB per kilometer at 850 nanometers and 1.5 dB per kilometer at 1300 nanometers. So we will add in the amount of loss for the fiber based on the length of the fiber. Now, if I spliced on pigtails on the end, I would add a couple of splices. If I had a patch in the middle, I would add a couple of connections there. We need to tell it how many connections we have. The link I'm doing today only has connections on the end. So I'll say done. So now I've set up my test. I'm doing a smart remote test. I'm doing a bidirectional. I'm doing OM450 micron fiber. I'm going to do the TIA 568.3-D-1 test limit. I'm doing a 1 jumper reference. My connector type is SC. So I'm going to hit save. Now I'm going to come down here and delete my cable ID set. I'm going to create a new cable ID set. Now in this case, I can create a sequence of cable IDs. So I could say 001A through 12B. So what this will do is it'll create 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B. So this is each of my fibers for each pair. I'll say done. Now it's detected I have the CertiFiber Pro module in here. So what it's going to do is it's going to say, well, we're doing fiber. What tests are we going to run? Now for today, we're going to do loss and length. Now what will happen is if I check this, I will not be 100% done with my testing until all of the tests are complete for each of the fibers. Now I can also do fiber inspection. And with fiber inspection, what this will do is we're going to apply an inspection limit to the end faces of our fibers. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save. Now before I continue, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to click, I'm going to say new test. And this time, instead of doing a test type of smart remote, I'm going to do fiber inspector. And for fiber inspector, I'm going to set my test limit to my multi-mode test limit right here. And I'll hit save. So now we've come in and added this test right here where we're going to inspect the end faces of our fibers, and we're going to compare that with a standard, and we're going to save it. So now I'll come back. I'm going to choose my fiber inspector test. I'll say use selected. So now it's going to say next ID. We're going to do fiber 1A and 1. So we're going to come over here, and what I'm going to do is I've got my equipment here. We can get the coffee out of the way. We don't need that. Got my cleaning pen. I've got my remote. So I'm going to grab a fiber just to show you an example. So we'll grab one of the test reference cords. So let's say before I start going in and doing my testing, I want to do my end face inspection. So what I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to grab my fiber inspection scope. We'll zoom in just a little bit on our fiber inspection scope right here. And what we'll find with this is that I've got the tip that goes on there. Now in this case, I've got the 2.5 millimeter tip that I'm going to use with SC connectors. Now this screws on there. So I just take this tip, I put that right on there, I screw that on. Now one of the things that I like to do before I start using that is I'll come over here and I'm going to grab my little fiber cleaning cube. I like to pull some of the fiber material off of that, and I like to take and just clean the tip off of that. So if I've got any finger grease or anything on there, that's going to get on the end of my fiber. Now there's one other thing I want to show you on here, and that's our secret button right there. And watch what happens on my screen back here and on the Versiv screen. When I hit that, it takes me to the fiber inspector screen. So it makes it a lot easier for us to go in and jump right into that screen. So I can come in, I'm going to pull the dust cap off, I'm going to carefully put that on the end. Oh, that does not look good at all. Now if I hit analyze, what this is going to do is it's going to compare it with our standard. It's going to say we failed, and it calls out that big piece of dirt right there. So I'm going to grab my fiber cleaning pen. Now with my fiber cleaning pen, I like to leave this in the housing right, or in the case right there. Just helps keep it clean. I'm going to pop the cap off of that. We're going to grab our fiber. We're going to give it a couple of clicks. Now do we have to give it 2 clicks? Probably not. But I do. I've just gotten in a habit of doing that. So now, boy, that end face looks a lot better. So I'm going to hit analyze. And that passes now. So I can hit save. And I'm going to save that to end 1 of fiber 1A right there. So we'll hit save. Now I can do something with that. I can put the dust cap back on it. I can put it back. I can plug it into where it goes. Let's just go ahead and do the other end of this fiber. We're going to save that. So I'm going to come in, I'll put my fiber inspection scope on that. I'll hit the play button. I can tell you that is not going to pass right there. And this is why dust caps, it doesn't guarantee the fiber is clean. So let's give that a clean. Ooh, much better. I can hit analyze. That passes. So I hit save. And now I'm going to say that's N2 of fiber 1A. So we'll hit save. So we could go through all of our fibers and inspect those, and this gives us a pass-fail result on our fiber to show us whether it has passed or failed. That's fantastic. Now, before I can go in and do any of my testing, I need to set reference. And this is something that I want you to go back and practice. Okay? After you've gone in and sat through this, I want you to go back, I want you to practice setting reference. Because this is one of the more challenging parts of this, but once you get it down, you're going to find that it's awfully easy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch my test back here. I'm going to go back to Smart Remote, say Use Selected. And I'm going to come into Set Reference. Now, there's a wizard that's going to help us set reference. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say Run Wizard. Now, before I set reference, it's important that I make sure that the CertiFiber Pro modules have been turned on for at least 5 minutes. If the temperature difference between where they were stored and where you're using them is significant, it needs to be longer than that. What you're going to find is that as these warm up, the power output increases. And so our reference can get thrown off if we set reference too soon. And if you notice, as you're going through and doing testing, you start getting negative test results. We expect to see a positive loss. If you get a negative test result, that can be an indicator that you did not give the CertiFiber Pro long enough to warm up. So in this case, it tells me connect the encircled flux test reference cords to the output ports of each device. Now, a couple notes. We are using Fluke Networks encircled flux test reference cords right here. They've got this little puck right here. What this does is this conditions the launch. This ensures that we are properly launching the light into the fiber. We're perfectly filling that multi-mode fiber. Now, when we're working with single mode, we do not need an encircled flux test reference cord. But to be encircled flux compliant, we need to use the Fluke Networks encircled flux test reference cords with the CertiFiber Pro. You'll notice that on the end of these cords, there is a red boot. That red boot goes toward the light. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my encircled flux test reference cord right here. I'm going to get that ready to go. Now, before I start going in and doing my testing, I'm going to remove the caps on the output port and on the meter port on both the main and the remote. I'm going to tuck those caps underneath. I find that kind of lifts it up off the bench a little bit. I'm going to take my click cleaner right here, and I'm going to come in. I'm going to clean the output and the meter ports on both the main and the remote. So I want to make sure those are clean. Then I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to grab the red boot on my encircled flux test reference cord. And let's switch over here. I'm going to take my fiber inspection scope. I'm going to put it on there and watch this. This has to be one of the coolest things on here. I'm going to push this button right here on the bottom. It takes me out of Fiber Inspector and takes me, or out of the wizard, and takes me right into Fiber Inspector. So I can see that the end face of that is still clean. So I'm going to plug that into the output port of the main. Now I'm going to jump ahead just on a step here because I like to get the fibers hooked up, one at a time. Now, I am laying the fiber out off the edge of the bench. We want to make sure we don't have any coils in our test reference cords when we're using these, especially with the single mode. I'm going to pull the cap off the other end. Now look at that. Just putting the cap on there got that dirty. Remember we inspected that before and it was clean? So I'm going to pull the cap off my click cleaner right there. Give that a clean. That looks good. I'm going to plug that into the meter port on the remote. I'm going to grab my other encircled flux test reference cord right here. We're going to plug the red boot into the output port of the remote. Now, it is really important to note that once we have set reference, we do not disconnect the fiber from the output port. Okay. Also, the output port is always a UPC connector. So even if you are using APC connectors on single mode for testing, you need to have test reference cords that are UPC on one end and APC on the other. All right, so that looks good. So I'm going to come in and connect those up. And I can hit the back button, and that's going to take me back to this screen. So I'm going to hit next. So just connect those up. Now I'm going to set reference. And what reference does is it zeroes out the optical signal strength coming from each end. So I'll hit set reference. I've now set reference. I'm going to come back here. I'm going to say view reference. What we're looking for here is the values that I like to look for are between negative 23.5 and negative 25 for 50 micron multimode fiber. Now that's a pretty tight range. That's a range I really target when I'm doing this. If I forget what that range is, I can come in here and hit this question mark and it shows me right here for multimode fiber, 50 micron. Here it listed as 19.4 to 26.5. I like 23.5 to 25. That really lets me know that if I'm outside that range, there's something wrong with those test reference cords and I may need to replace them. So now I can come back here. That reference value is going to be saved with every one of our tests. So now I've set reference. I hit next. And notice there are no bulkhead connectors over here. We are going directly from the main to the remote. No bulkhead connectors. So now I hit next. And it says disconnect the input port. So I'm going to disconnect it from the meter ports. So I'll come over here. Now I will grab a bulkhead connector. And I'm going to show you a trick that I have figured out that has made setting reference so much easier. And that is, I'm going to grab a fiber cleaning swab right here. I'm going to take that swab. I'm just going to give this bulkhead connector just a little clean. I'll tell you, in doing these classes, getting some dust in this bulkhead connector was one of the biggest challenges, and it caused me to have all kinds of problems setting reference. So I found that by cleaning that, it solved a lot of the problems. Now, what I want to do is take this swab, now that I've used it, that goes in the garbage can. We don't reuse that for anything. So what I'm going to do is disconnect the input fiber right here. I do not disconnect the output fiber now that I've set reference. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to plug that into the remote side of the bulkhead adapter. I'm going to remove the input fiber here. I'm going to plug that into the main side of the bulkhead adapter. And I hit next. And it says add our additional test reference cords. So I'm going to grab the additional test reference cords. These have reference grade connectors on them. Give us lower loss. So we're going to come in and I'm going to grab my cleaner, hit my secret button. Let's inspect that. Oh, that looks good. We're going to plug that into the input port. The black always goes toward the input port. We're going to take a look at the red booted end right here. Oh, not good. We'll give that a clean. That looks better. We still got a little something on there. See if we can get that little something off of there. Let's see. There we go. So now what we're going to do is we're going to plug that into the main side of the bulkhead adapter. We're going to grab our other additional test reference cord. And I'm going through this really slowly just to show you. We can, typically if we're doing this out on a job or something, we can get through this a lot more quickly because we're not explaining every step. So we're going to come in here. We're going to look at that end. That looks good. I'm going to plug that into the meter port. And I'm going to take a look at the last end face here. Oh, yow. Much better. So we're going to plug that in on the remote side. If we have everything hooked up right, we hear that chirp. That lets us know that the main and the remote are connected together. Now, why am I going through all of these steps? Well, what's going to happen? I'm going to hit next. We see that we've got these connected up. The reason we do the one jumper reference this way is this allows us to verify this connection right here to make sure that everything is good. This is where I do my TRC verification. What I'm looking for is loss values less than or equal to 0.15 dB for multi-mode and 0.25 dB for single mode. So I hit it. I got it right there. 0.02 for the one on the output of the main, 0.12 for the one over here. Hey, that's right within the range. Now I could spend some time trying to go in and make that even better, but you know what? I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to say, you know, that's underneath 0.15. Now, these TRC references are saved. They're saved using this timestamp right here. So if I'm looking at a set of test results for somebody, I expect to see the TRC verification records in there. That tells me that you set reference properly. Now here's the deal. If you got 0.45 for this, 0.7, it's going to give you a warning. This works against you. That loss is added to all of your test results. It is in your best interest to get as low a value in here as you can possibly get. And we're right in that range that we want to be in. So now we have successfully set reference on the CertiFiber Pro. So I'm going to hit next. It says disconnect those. And let's put in the fiber link we're going to test. So I'm going to come over here, and I've got my little testing artifact right here. This is a box that Fluke Networks builds for doing demonstrations and things like that. And let's move our camera up just a little bit here. So I'm going to take that box right there. We'll flip that around. We'll open that up. Now, I happen to really like my test reference cords. I don't want to have to buy new test reference cords. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the bulkhead adapter for my camera, and I'm going to put that adapter on the camera. Now please be very careful with screwing that on. That doesn't need to be clamped down. I've done classes where we just about had to use a pair of vice grips or channel locks to get that off. I'm going to go to my fiber inspector screen. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give my ports on my test box just a quick inspection. Why? Because again, I like my test reference cords. I don't want anything in there that's going to cause those to get damaged. This is how we increase the life of our test reference cords. So it's a good idea before you start testing all your connections. You could even have somebody else go through and inspect these real quick. But just go through and inspect those, make sure they're clean, and if they all look good, now we're ready to run our test. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here, I'm going to unhook my remote side. I'm going to plug that into the far end. I'm going to take this side. I'm going to plug that in. We hear the chirp. That lets us know that the main and the remote are connected together. So now that the main and the remote are connected together, we're going to go ahead and run our test. That's right, we said we were doing a bidirectional test. So I'm going to come over here and it says swap those fibers. So we're going to swap the fibers. We're going to plug it in, and because we set our connector type to SC, it auto continues the test. We passed! Woohoo! So in this case, we come back and we see that we've got fibers 1A and 1B. And we passed. We see our loss was 0.52 dB on fiber 1A, and it was 0.46 dB on fiber 1B. And it tells us here was our limit. Here's the fiber we're testing. So now, if I drill into that fiber, it shows me that when I tested from the main, or from the remote to the main, so the input was on the main, our loss was 0.44 dB. Our limit was 1.16 dB. Now, remember, because of the test limit we selected, we allowed 0.5 dB for the first and last connectors. So that was 1 dB. then based on the loss per kilometer for our fiber, we saw that we added 0.16 dB for the length of the fiber. This gave us a limit of 1.16 dB with a margin of 0.72. That is fantastic. We noticed that our loss per kilometer for our higher wavelength, 1300 nanometers, is half what it is at 850. So we add half that amount, 0.08. Nice margin. I can look in the other direction. Here we see 0.52 in that direction. Shows us what our margins were. Margins are great. Our length, here our length limit was set to 6,500 feet. Our length was 175.5. We passed our length. So now we come back and I could say test again. Now, just to show you on our home screen here, we have autosave turned on. So what's going to happen is we are going to go in and for our autosave, we will automatically save our test each time we run it. So I can say done. I could say test. It's going to run my test. It's going to say swap my fibers. So let's go back and do that one more time. I got myself mixed up there. Let's swap those properly. I messed up that test by doing that. Let's test again, and then we're going to run one more test. All right, so we're going to swap our fibers. There we go. Came back, we passed. We kind of expect that. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to swap these one more time here. We're going to hit test. Tells us to swap the fibers. Now, over on the remote, our lights are bouncing back and forth. That tells us to swap those. All right, so we're going to do that one. Oh no, we failed. So in this case, what we find is that we failed fiber 3A right there. So it shows us what our loss was, what our limit was, and what our margin is. We see we got a negative margin. So this tells us, hey, we've got too much loss on that fiber. So we would need to go in and figure out what is causing that additional loss on there. And that's where we might come in with our OTDR and do some troubleshooting on that and figure out what is causing that loss. So I'm going to come back to my home screen, and I want to finish up by showing you the test results. So if I come into results, what we notice is that right here for fiber 1A, if I look at the results for fiber 1A, it shows me my loss in length, fiber inspection N1, fiber inspection N2. Because those two tests were made as part of the same project, the test results are integrated in there, and when I export those out, I can bring those in. When I generate my report, it's going to include my end faces as well. I'll come back here. We see our loss and length for each of our fibers. It's going to show us what the loss and the length was in each direction. So we can come back, we can see that we've got those passes. Now in this case, 3A failed. Now let's say I went in and figured out what went wrong with 3A. So I could come in and I could tap on 3A and I can say I want to test again. So let me just move my fibers over here. So if I came over here and move that over, and we say test again. So it's going to run the test. Now I'm going to swap my fibers. So after I swap the fibers, I can hit save. Now notice it only is going to save 3A because that's the only fiber I'm retesting. So I can hit save. It says, whoa, wait a second. You're only saving 3A. I say yes. It says, are you sure you want to overwrite 3A? Because we can only have one result for each test per cable ID. I say yes. So now, when I come out here and I take a look at my results, everything is a pass. And right down here, there are my TRC values. And I can come back and I can look at those and I can see that the person that ran this test did one jumper properly. The values were the values we expected. And now we're all set to where we want to be. So that is how we go in. We set up a project. We set up a loss and length test. We set up a fiber inspection test. We set a one jumper reference. And then we go in and we run those tests. So if you have any questions, we've got the Q&A window there. I've got the chat window. I want to make sure that if you've got any questions about those, that we get those answered. We do a full day class on this. We go through, setting up a variety of different test references. Everybody gets access to one of these versives that we have here to go through those exercises that we do. And we make sure that you understand how we go in and set all this stuff up. So you can go out. Let me just throw this in here. There's a link to that. And I'll tell you what, I'm going to send a follow-up email to everyone. And one of the things that we'll have a link to in there is I put together just a little PDF that's got some testing checklists. So when you're going to go out and do testing, these are the steps that you want to make sure you follow. And on there for the CertiFiber Pro, we have the values for each of our different fiber types of what values we're looking for when we set reference. Well, if there's no questions, then I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up, and we're going to get ready for the next session. So thank you very much for joining me. I look forward to seeing you possibly in the next session or maybe in one of our classes. Thank you very much.